From CGTN headquarters in Beijing, this is The Hub with Wang Guan.
Hello and welcome to The Hub. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. As China's 14th five-year plan draws to a close, the fourth plenary session of the 20th CPC Central Committee is underway here in Beijing from October the 20th through the 23rd. That is a landmark meeting that will set the tone for China's upcoming 15th five-year plan and the nation's next phase of modernization. From institutional reform to economic governance, from technological innovation to national security, this session is expected to chart the course, a new blueprint for advancing Chinese modernization and achieving high-quality development and a world of growing amid a world of growing uncertainty. So what is new signals that will be announced during this plenary, and what policy signals will they send about China's future, both domestically and in terms of its foreign policy? And how will the 15th five-year plan balance long-term strategy with short-term realities? To help us unpack all these questions, we're joined in Jakarta, Indonesia by Mr. Bert Hofman. He's the former director of China at the World Bank. In Beijing, China, we have Liu Zhiqin, a senior research fellow at the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies at Renmin University. In our Beijing studio, we have Professor John Gong, professor of economics at the University of International Business and Economics, UIBE. Professor John Gong, let me ask you about this first, because we all know the five-year plan was modeled after the Soviet model back in the 1950s, 1953 to be exact. And then, of course, came the fall of the Soviet Union, and China still carried forward this five-year plan, although China, in the Chinese language, it went from a five-year 五年计划 to 五年规划, meaning more of a macro approach instead of a hands-on direction. I mean, why five-year plan? Well, why still five-year plans for China's socio-economic development?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. You're absolutely right, Wang Guan, that this practice has been can be traced back to the Soviet era. This is a practice that China has been sticking to all over these years. But I think there's quite a bit of a distinction here. In the old days, the five-year plan is really a plan to be sort of implemented down to the micro level. Today, we still use the word plan, but I think it's more of a set of setting a set of policy objectives. It's sort of a national development strategy vision, essentially. So this is not so much about, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, down to very micro levels. It's more about setting the objectives that what we have to do to achieve within this five-year period, and the set of policies that might be introduced to support that set of objectives. I think this is what this plan really means. So I think there's a bit of distinction here. And I think for a country to have a national development strategic plan is something that's fairly common, and it's very good for the country's long-run interests.
I mean, every year, the White House announces its national security strategy, national foreign policy strategy. I mean, strategy is the word here. Perhaps we can consider going from five-year plan to five-year strategy in the English language. Right. Professor Liu Zhiqin, let me ask you about this. What do you think, I mean, in what terms has the current five-year strategies and five-year plans served China's socioeconomic and political development?
I should say the five-year plan is one of the most important contributions that were left by the former Soviet Union. This is really a very good heritage for the developing countries. We know that 5 years is not too long and not too short. It's very good and acceptable for the government to make their plan for long-term and short-term, because every government, they should understand what the urgent needs they have to accomplish or to meet the demand of the people of the society. So this is the major task of the five-year plan. And secondly, we should know all the developing countries, they have limited resources and the technological the innovation in this field, that we make a 5 plan or 3-year plan in order to have very targeted the proposals and the plan for all the development. So that's why we see that a lot of achievement from by the Soviet Union in the first 5-year plan, because they lay out a very good foundation for agriculture. So this is what we have learned also sum up our experiences according to the practice. So in this way, China's five-year plan has made really very important contributions to the development. For instance, the first thing is that we have forecast. This is very, very important because we know that we should have all battles with good preparation. That means we do not have any battles without the preparation. That is very important for the purpose for the five-year plan. And secondly, the five-year plan can make a good preparation for all possible risks that are imposed by external uh, market or external environment. As we know, for all the government, they are facing two challenges, one from domestic, the other from external. Domestic is the demand, external is the uncertainty. All these five-year plan we have already made a very good efficiency that help China's development in the right time and in the right position. So this is a very important point that should be discussed.
Yeah, Professor Liu, thanks for all these insights. Mr. and Director Hoffman, let me ask you, because the organization that you were heading, the World Bank, along with the IMF, used to have long-term outlooks on the global economy during the fall meeting in Washington, D.C. And I was very honored to have covered those meetings for years on end back then. But and now you have this spring meeting as well. Instead of one meeting, you have two meetings and multiple meetings, given the short-term policy shocks to national economies. So from a point of view of a former World Bank leader, how do you look at China's strategies with a long view in mind?
So the World Bank still has long-term projections, just like the IMF. They go to about 5 years. Every now and then the World Bank gives 30 years outlook. But for individual countries, the World Bank used to help governments make development programs. And that included basically an outlook for 5 or 10 years, depending on the country, on to optimize development resources. That's no longer the case. So the World Bank has become more modest, in part because the world is more complex than these more static plans allow. And China, of course, is a very good example of that. China left its more planning orientation in the plan in the mid-2000s, when there was already a socialist market economy, and the plan with a lot of individual targets was no longer appropriate. But having a plan as a strategic plan, and for China, very important, having a plan as a coordination mechanism amongst the many actors inside China that have to respond to government guidance, I think remains very important. And for some countries, it would be a really good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I want to compare notes and ask another question to Professor John Gong. How important is this type of consistency that the Chinese leadership, through administrations, through the decades, has been sending to the Chinese domestic economy and also to the global economy?
Well, I think it's extremely important. I think some of the national development objectives are of a long-term in nature. And this is obviously going to be constrained by the political system in different countries. And fortunately in China, we have this political stability over the long run. So I think it guarantees the policy consistency and continuity to achieve these sort of long-term goals. I think it makes a huge difference. I mean, really, for things like green development, for example, it's a long-term vision. And take the United States as an example, right? Joe Biden has a green strategy, and all of a sudden Trump came in and said, "Look, we're going to Joe, baby Joe," and entirely throw out this the green agendas, transition to alternative energy, stuff like that. So I think this is a living, very
or the National
example.
Science Foundation, or the public health authorities, or a VOA.
Yeah, exactly.
The National Heritage Foundation.
Bobby, there's on several areas. In several areas, President Trump is doing a 180-degree turn. So this is a very good example of how a long-term political stability can help achieving these long-term objectives. And in China, we've been doing this for so many years.
How important do you think, Professor John Gong, to course correct, to admit shortfalls and failures, and to adjust accordingly, to use the Chinese political, a political term that is to advance with changing circumstances?
Well, I mean, we have to keep in mind that it's not just a plan. I think at the end of the 5-year period, there's a review process, right? Right now, I think the central government is indeed reviewing its achievements. In other words, comparing with the objectives in the 14th 5-year plan, see how we've been doing so far. What are the shortfalls? What are the things we've done wrong? What are the new priorities? So I think this review process is very important. And this is exactly what we do. I mean, review process is part of the planning for the designing of the next plan, right?
Yeah,
so I think this is a very established institutional practice, and that's been serving the country well. And I think China is going to continue to do that.
Yeah, let's talk about what's happening right now at the Great Hall of the People and other venues throughout Beijing. That is a very important meeting. Professor Liu Zhiqin, let me ask you about this. What can we expect from this 4th plenary session of the 20th Committee of the Central Committee members of the CPC? What can we expect?
I think we can expect many things from this plenary session, because as we know that the 4th plenary session is always has the major task to make a blueprint or a year plan for next year. Now this session has a major task to make next 5-year plan. This is quite a key element of this task. The first thing we should say that this plenary session will give us a principle that touches and a picture that China will what to do and what to be realized, what we should pay great attention, or in which way that we should take a deep reform, and to what extent we can open to the outside. So all these tasks will be discussed. And secondly, it's quite important that we discuss all the hidden and previous the risk we are facing, because all these uncertainties and risk imposed from the external market are still a headwind for China. So this plenary session will tell us what to do, what should be done to prevent all the risks for all these kinds of the workers in China, for especially also in the financial section, that we will pay great effort to make any possible risk, because we know that the next 5-year financial power or financial effort will be focused to promote China's economy with a sustainable power. So this is a very important point. So we can expect and many things from this plenary session. I think will have a very bright picture that by the end of this plenary session, communique or the document will be issued.
Yeah, we're keeping an eye on it, because in the previous sessions there have been key words that have become guiding principles for China's economic development going forward, such as dual circulation, such as major changes unseen in a century that was enunciated by the Chinese leadership, fully aware of what's happening regarding external shocks. Director Hofman, in the past 5 years, what do you think are the bright spots or the highlights of the Chinese economy, and what are the areas that you think China perhaps should have done more of on the policy end?
Well, if you look back the last 5 years, there haven't been easy years. There was COVID, there was increased trade tensions with the United States. And if you consider that, China has been doing relatively well. They've maintained a relatively high pace of growth, which is going to be around 5%. It was not a target in the 14th 5-year plan, but they came out quite reasonably well. I think they persisted quite well in pursuing what is called high quality growth, the overarching long-term goal of China's economy, by shifting more resources to innovation, by getting more productivity out of those innovations, and so that and also maintaining high competitiveness in manufacturing. On the downsides, there's issues of consumption, of domestic demand that is rather stubborn in getting up. Local government debt issues, local government finance issues in the aftermath of the property bust that still need to be resolved. And so some of those things I think I will see in the guidance for the government on the 15th 5-year plan that comes out of this plenum.
Yeah, because the next plan is being drafted, and perhaps considered and deliberated upon as we speak, and that is happening against the geopolitical tensions, growing rivalry insisted by Washington on its partners, rivals alike. So what do you want the policymakers to know, if you had the chance to, regarding the next 5 years to be included in this 5-year plan, the 15th version?
Well, first, I think it's very important to deliberate on whether it should include a growth target or not. The 14th 5-year plan did not. I think there's now a lot of uncertainty, and maybe some guidance on a range for growth in the next 5 years will be helpful for the many actors in the economy. Second, concrete plans on how to solve local government debt, and that requires major fiscal reforms that I think would be very helpful to be communicated in the plenum, but then also in the 5-year plan. And third, and I would put that under the banner of common prosperity, dual circulation is fine, high quality, new productive forces is fine, but a common prosperity, I think, can be further improved. So concrete measures on how to achieve common prosperity, more balanced growth, how to get the countryside to catch up with cities are all very important objectives of the government, and the next 5 years are critical for that.
Yeah, I mean, common prosperity versus get rich first versus, catering to market sensitivity. That is a tough and delicate balance. Professor John Gong, regarding domestic consumption, that has been, relatively speaking, a weak link, considering the size of the Chinese economy. What do you expect in this regard during the 15th 5-year plan making?
Yeah, I think from a policy objective, I think as the country's economy is moving more and more towards a sort of a developed economy model, there will be more emphasis on the demand side, more emphasis on the social welfare side. I think previously China's 5-year plan has been primarily focused on building things, about investment, about building the capabilities, investing in new technologies, stuff like that. But I think we're starting to be more like a developed economy. As a matter of fact, China has relinquished its developed country status privileges at the WTO, right? Yes. So, obviously, we're very close to getting to the high income category according to the World Bank's national income classification scheme. At the end of the day, we're becoming more like a developed country, and it's very difficult to generate the kind of high growth rates moving forward. And one of the defining characteristic of a developed country is that the government budgets is spending more money on supporting social welfare programs, providing public goods for consumption. I think I see a trend towards that. It would be more emphasis about these kind of public goods kind of things, especially against the backdrop of President Xi's very much emphasis on people-centered agenda, right? Especially, I think, towards sort of a lower strata of the society. So I think this is one area that probably the next 5-year plan is going to emphasize on.
It's interesting you mentioned China relinquishing its developing country status that has generated quite a bit of international media. Bert, let me ask you about this. How are the international community, as far as you know, responding to China's latest announcement of relinquishing its status as a developing country?
So first, to clarify, this is within the context of the World Trade Organization, where there are some benefits allowed for developing nations. China has now said we will no longer call upon that. It doesn't say that they give up the status, because they also see themselves as leaders in the developing world. Second, in the World Bank, there is the issue of being allowed to borrow from the World Bank. And the US is hammering on pushing China out, whereas China feels it's still developing, it still needs external resources and expertise for its development path, and they want to maintain their status as a borrower. So even though China's given up its right to call on developing country status, the international reaction has already been, if you want, more negative towards China in granting those concessions.
Bert, you're the former director of the World Bank for China. So let me ask you this. China's economy grew by 5.2% in the first 3 quarters, reaching over 100 trillion yuan, but the pace slowed slightly to 4.8% in the third quarter. What does that tell us about the current state of the Chinese economy?
Well, look, I think like most of the rest of the world, the policy uncertainty right now is at a peak, and therefore it's very hard for enterprises to choose investments at this particular point in time, because tomorrow the tariff landscape may be very different, or the technology landscape may be very different. So that's the first reaction to people, is holding back. You see the same thing in Europe, you see the same thing in the United States. The exception is AI. There's sort of an AI boom going on, but overall investments is quite weak. And that, of course, is reflected in growth numbers. I think for China, where investment overall is still quite high, I do believe they need to look at new engines of growth. Yes, development and new quality productive forces and technology, that's going to be an important driver. But the other drivers is undoubtedly going to be the services sector. If you look at countries at China's development level, growth and employment and jobs will come from services. And that would be, I think, one of the key focus of the next 5-year plan, to get the services sector up to speed, to be as productive, to be as fast growing as the manufacturing sector has been over the past 5 years.
Yeah, points taken. Professor Liu, how do you rate the performance and the state of the Chinese economy? First 3 quarters, averaging 5.2% growth year on year.
I think the 5.2% for the first 3 quarters are quite satisfied, because as we know, with the market expectation that the China first can fulfill its target as they promised, because Chinese government is the government that who can honor its promise. That this is the only one government, in my opinion. So I want to recite the very important the idea that imposed by the Chinese Asian, the greatest poet, Su Shi. He said 330 years before, who had the greatest successors, they must have extraordinary talents and also indomitable wills. I think that China has already enjoyed the 3 points. That means that China has extraordinary talent and talented people, and also very important thing that China has the indomitable will that to fulfill all the target that issued or stimulated by the government. This is the main reason that China has always pushed themselves and rely on themselves and coordinated with the global market, so in order to get a better result. Because our only purpose and the solely holy purpose is that to make a better life for the people, for the society. So this is a very important. That's why we see that the first 3 quarters, the performance of the economy is very positive. This is the major reason that because we have to fulfill this target in order to provide this, enough or sufficient products and goods for the people. This is the main reason, I think.
Another key area is innovation. Professor John Gong, China has been rated as the world's top 10 global innovation index, global innovation country by this Global Innovation Index. It is a milestone, of course, acknowledging China's technological leap forward, especially in terms of application, not necessarily original and basic research yet, although we're getting there, hopefully. How do you look at the drivers underpinning China's, around 5% economic growth in the first quarters of the year? What do you think of it in terms of AI, semiconductors, grain growths, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, we are in a high-tech race with the United States, so we're putting tons of resources into the rising emerging industries like AI, like robotics, these biotech, these things. So I worry less about the investment in these fields. I think across the different levels of the Chinese government, across the corporate China, tons of VC community, tons of resources are being invested in this area. What I do worry about is that, after all these being done, AI-related activities, for example, still represents a very, very small part of China's economy. So the question really is how to leverage that investment, how to leverage the resources put into this, and sort of have a spillover effect over other parts of the economy. After all, I would say 90% of the employment in China really have nothing to do with AI, right? And how can you, play that investment as sort of a locomotive for the national economy? How to pull the resource into other areas that have more relevance to people's lives? I think that's a challenge. You look at the Statistics Bureau's numbers, the investments in those sort of very fast developing areas is very good numbers. I mean, double-digit growth in these areas. But if you look at the overall investment level in China right now, it's still kind of weak at this point. So I think, how do you make that balance? How to have more of a spillover effect from these sort of more popular areas into other less popular but more relevant areas for people's lives? I think that's a challenge that we have to deal with.
Bert, in terms of China's foreign policy or projection of its economic and political capital, what do you expect? Because some people say we're entering the era of duplicity, given the rivalry between Washington and Beijing. What are you looking out for when you, as we are, anticipating the 15th five-year plan?
So, I mean, it's the key question for the rest of the world almost. Look, the United States will play a much lesser role in the years going forward for a lot of domestic political reasons, and that's not going to change. That's not just Trump. That is right now where the United States is. So the second economy in the world is China. Great benefit of the existing international system. So I believe that China should pay great attention on how to maintain as much as possible of that international system with the United States playing a lesser role. So it does mean that China could potentially step up, but also be very active in coordinating with the rest of the world, with ASEAN, with India, with Europe, to maintain as much as possible of an open international trading system.
Do you expect the fracture between the global south and the global north to be strengthened and increased?
I believe that the global south will, if you want, find more opportunities in China. But at the same time, Europe is still a very big market. Japan is still a very big market. Korea is a very active investor. Japan is a very active investor. So there won't be a sort of a dividing line between North and South, or if you want, between the West and the rest of the world. I cannot imagine that, and it would be very damaging.
All right, with that, we come to the end of this edition of The Hub. Thank you so much, Mr. Bert Hofman, Professor Liu Zhiqin, and Professor John Gong for joining us. And that's it for this edition of The Hub. Thank you so much for tuning in. Our news coverage continues on CGTN. Bye and take care.